So, I'm going to talk about today letting go of the story and the identity of being the sick one. Um, that was a really big part of like my turning point in my journey. So there was a specific turning point in my journey. I didn't realize like how much of a turning point it was at the time, but I've spoken about it a couple of times where things started going from trending down to getting out of it. And one part was like investigating the beliefs about recovery, like the thoughts I had and the beliefs I had that were keeping me stuck. And so that was one part of it. And this is kind of along the same lines of that is the the identity that one develops when you're dealing with something like this, of being the one who is sick, the one who has a chronic illness, and the story of that chronic illness. So, briefly, what happened for me, and it was one of the beautiful things of this whole journey for me, was that this whole process was like stripping away all these identities that I'd had in the past that were causing me to suffer, I suppose, or because, um, yeah. So, anyways, like throughout this process, as my life got smaller and smaller and smaller because of the um, trying to manage the chronic illness, all of the like I came to a point where I was like, who who am I even anymore? Like I remember distinctly just like one day, like I was living at home, I wasn't exercising anymore, I was barely able to see people, I was um, I wasn't studying, I didn't have a job, so there was like nothing, it was just I was just trying to figure out this 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 condition, what was going on, and there was nothing else going on, and it was just like what, like thinking back to what my life was before this, and then what had it become. It was just like so, like that all of the things that I thought I was weren't true because I wasn't them anymore, right? So like if you'd asked me before this whole process, like who am I? Like there would probably be some answer along the lines of like, oh, I'm a young guy who plays a lot of sport and I'm studying and I want to get a job in a certain field one day, and all of these false identities. But now that was all taken away, so it's like, okay, I'm none of those things, but what am I? And yeah, then when I got more into like investigating the mind and thoughts and like meditation and spirituality and those kind of things, I learned that it was like all of our beliefs and identities that cause us to suffer and get stuck in the first place. It's like we identify as something, and then obviously that's not who we are, but then that identity gets challenged by something, and then that causes us to suffer as we try to defend this false identity in a certain way. So when I learned all of that, it was so beautiful to like, or just like, it was crazy to see how like that is what had happened throughout this journey. In any case, was like life just stripped away my identities. Like I didn't have a choice, and I was just left like, holy shit! If I'm not any of those things, then like, what am I? And then that became like an inquiry for me that became very freeing. Like the more you investigate that, it's like, okay, if I'm not this next thought, this belief, this identity, then what am I? Like, so that is, yeah, that's a little bit of a side tangent. Um, but so what happens is throughout this journey, what happened was like because all of those identities were no longer valid, then what happened is this new identity forms of like, okay, well, I'm this guy with a chronic illness now. I can't do this, I can't do that. Um, I've been sick for so long. So then the mind reforms around like the only identity that it can at that time, because all of those other ones are gone, and then it forms a sickness identity, and that was really keeping me stuck, is because that was like my new identity now, and um, And then there's the story of being sick as well, keeping track of time, um, keeping track of symptoms, developing beliefs about what you can and can't do, all of that. Um, yeah, just at some point after reading other people's experiences with recovery and whatnot, it became clear to me that like there was this clinging to this identity that was keeping me stuck. It was like, okay, if I want to recover, I've got to let go of this. Like, stop trying to prove to people that I'm sick. Stop trying to get sympathy from people. Stop trying to explain. I think I've mentioned this in another video before, but it's so important to stop trying to get people to understand because they can't. And it's that trying to get somebody to understand how much you're suffering. No one's going to understand. Like everyone's living their own story, and they'll respond in the way that feels best to them. Like there'll often be some form of compassion, but it's just no one else can experience what you're experiencing, right? So um, it's a futile attempt, and it's more than that. It's not only futile; it's like it's negatively impacting you. Um, so, yeah, it's like such an important step in the recovery process to let go of that identity that we form of that. So just, I mean, I'm trying to think about it now. There was still like more identity forming after that in part of the recovery process. And it was like, oh, I'm the one who's recovering now. And then as I got more interested in meditation and stuff, it was all of those kind of things. So there's still a process happening now of like letting go of those identities, because then when I was recovered, it was now I had to reintegrate with the real world, when I'd gotten really comfortable being on my own and being isolated. So it was again stepping out of um, that new identity, and it's just like just living as life happens. Yeah, but more specifically in the recovery journey, it's about letting go of being the sick one. And yeah, so like it can look, you'll be able to identify where this is playing out in your life. Maybe like when you're talking to other people, you're like forming this identity. um, Maybe when you're commenting on videos or asking for help from somebody, you're caught up in the story of like, I've been sick for so many months. I've got these really bad symptoms. You're like expressing the story, and then just ask yourself like, what is this giving you? Like, what are you getting out of this? And it's often like, it's an identity you're clinging to. It's like, this is like, I've got this story. I need to express it. And then you're looking for sympathy, right? You're like, you don't know what else to do, so you cling to the story. I suppose. I mean, I can't speak for other people. I'm just kind of applying my experience and what I've learned. Um, so yeah, like for me, it was like the more I kept track of the symptoms and the timeline, that was when things got worse and worse and worse, because it was like, shit, it's been a year, it's been 13 months, it's been 14 months, it's been 15 months, and then you just start spinning the story in your head like, oh, the next thing is going to be 10 years, and then I'm going to be this and this and this. But I mean, that's not real. Like, I had no idea what was waiting for me like 1 month around the corner, 2 months around the corner, let alone the next hour. Like, you just don't know the future. It's completely unknowable. Even though the mind will, like, when something happens, like, oh, I knew that was going to happen, but you didn't. um, but yeah, like it's just that story, that narrative um, that we cling to, that's really keeping us stuck. So yeah, like when I remember for myself when I was like posting on forums or something saying like, and I can clearly remember that I was exaggerating my story to like, I don't know, it just becomes, I think that's just it's like a validation kind of thing. It's like you see everybody else who's been struggling so much, and then you're like, okay, well, I've been struggling pretty bad, so like I'm gonna sell my story here. Like, this isn't the conscious thought process that was happening at the time, but it was the unconscious like motives the sharing of the story. So like I remember with like really like so difficult, like I don't know what to do, like really exaggerating the story and looking for sympathy and help, but nobody can save you from this, right? Like it's you who's got to face your shit, and that kind of like behavior or that pattern of like exaggerating a story and sharing it and that kind of thing isn't helping you. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that because it's like it really was a turning point for me where it's like I let go of all of that and be like, okay, well, there's no point, like that's just keeping me stuck. So like I stopped talking about symptoms. Like I was still living at my family, but like in the past it would be like every day I'd be like, oh, this is so bad. Like I do this and I feel like that afterwards, and trying to get them to understand how shit my life was and blah blah blah. But everyone's dealing with their own shit, and as I said, it wasn't. It was just making things worse for me. So then eventually it was like, okay, well, if I want to recover, I got to let go of this, got to let go of that identity, and then then I was like, I just got to do these things. Like there was an instinctual, intuitive knowing in me when I was doing something like is this going to help me or is this not? And it took me a long time to start to accept that I had to follow that instinct, where often it'd be like, yeah, but maybe like if I just rest for like another month and distract myself, then maybe things will just get better on their own. I think that's what a lot of people are hoping. Or maybe if I just try like another form of supplements or watch one more recovery story, like things will get better on their own. And in a sense, I had to do those things because I only eventually got to that point after it became clear that there was only that none of those paths were going to get me out of this. And then it became like as I said, like an instinctual thing where it was like, like now I'm feeling some symptoms. I can go sit and meditate, or I can go, listen to a podcast or go on Twitter or something like that. I was like, I know every time I've gone on Twitter in the past, it's like gets me all worked up, and then it gets in my stressful state, and then I get symptoms and blah blah blah. Or I know if I go like sit in nature or meditate or sit in silence or something like that, I know that's going to make me feel better. So again, it was difficult, and I didn't always follow this, but it was like a coming more and more into this, and then eventually I just again, it wasn't always completely obvious, but I started doing more and more the things that I knew were helping me, and then started to take bigger steps and started to drop the things that were keeping me stuck, and then ultimately you have to let go of that identity and those beliefs and those that story, because I could only recover when I completely, like, it didn't matter anymore, this whole illness thing, because that was what was keeping me stuck. Like once I got on the recovery path and started like focusing on like other things, I wasn't clinging to the story anymore, and I wouldn't have recovered if I was still thinking like I'm this guy who gets these symptoms if I do this and this and this. And it's difficult, as I said. It's always this process of like reconditioning and all of that. So it takes time. Like I didn't just stop like that. There was still all that conditioning. So it was always a roller coaster where I'd make a few steps, and then those old habit patterns would come up again for a bit, and then I'd become more aware of it, and I could start to work with it, and that kind of thing. So like there will be times when you feel like shit, this is so clear. Like you'll have like a moment where it's like, of course I can do this, and then maybe a week later you're like, oh shit, I'm back where I was, but you're not. It's just part of the process. So that's just a quick video on letting go of the identity and the story of being the sick one, and how important it was for me in the recovery journey. And I'm sure that it's going to be an important step for most. So hope that helps.